Can you give us your name, your date of birth, and where you now live, please?
My name is John Skinner. I was born October 22nd, 1946, and I live in Ophir, Utah.
Okay, and how did you get involved in mining in Utah?
I got involved in mining because my great-grandfather was a miner, my grandfather was a miner, and my dad was a miner.
And did they all mine here in the Ophir area?
Yes.
All at the same mine?
At the same mine, the Ophir Hill.
What brought your grandfather to this area?
My grandfather was born in Scotland, and on the way over to the United States, his mother died on the ship, and she was buried at sea. And then there were some people from Urda, Utah, who raised him, and then he became up into Ophir and married a Bates, who lived in the canyon, and that's how he became involved in mining.
Okay. When you were a child growing up here in Ophir, were there any other people that weren't miners, or was everything in the town connected to mining?
There was people that worked down at the Deseret Chemical Depot down there, the Army depot. So there was half and half. Some worked in the mines and some worked down at the Army depot.
So how long did you work at the mining?
I started right out of high school, but they wouldn't let me in the mine. I was outside because I wasn't 18, I was still 17 after high school. So I worked there till I became 18 in October, and then I went in the mine. I worked from 64 to 71.
Did they give you any kind of training on how to be a miner?
They just put me with an old-time miner, and he taught me the trade. That's how I learned it.
What did a miner's helper do?
Miner's helper helped the miner drill the rounds with a pneumatic drill, load the dynamite, blast, and then muck the ore out with a mucking machine, hooked up hoses for the miner, and just did whatever the miner told me to do or help him with.
When you were mining, what was a typical day like?
Typical day was you went up to the mine, you changed your clothes, you got into the cars, the 2.5-ton cars. They had lagging that went in. You sit on this piece of wood, and you faced each other, and then the motorman would take the cars into the mine to the hoist room. You get in the hoist room, and then everybody would just gather, and then 2 guys would get in the skip at a time and go down the shaft to the workings. So that was a typical day.
So from the time you donned your mining clothes till you actually got down to the face where you were going to work, how long would that take?
That was probably an hour and a half. So some of the time was spent just transporting yourself going in and then coming back out again.
Mm-hmm. Did you work in the same area of the mine as your dad?
No, I worked in different parts. I did work in some areas of my dad. I was the motorman for a while, which brought the ore out and the waste outside. The tunnel alone is 1.25 miles long back to the hoist room. And then from the hoist room down the incline shaft with a 30-degree angle, it goes down to the 1400, 1500, 1600, 1700, and then below the 1700 goes to a 60-degree angle down to the 1900. Then you go 1/4 mile back farther, and there's another hoist that goes down to the 2300 level.
So that was a very deep mine.
It's a deep mine and a very big mine. As a miner, you would drill with a pneumatic machine. You would load the round with dynamite, you'd blast, and then you'd go in with a mucking machine, which was air operated, and muck the contents out, put track in, lay ties, and then go on ahead and do the next thing the next day is drill it out, blast it, and muck it. And that was the job for the miner. And then I pulled pockets, and what a pocket puller is where they'd bring the ore out into a grizzly, they'd dump it in, and then they had a chute that went into the skip on the main shaft. You loaded the skip, and the hoisted that up to the top, and then dumped in chutes, and then from there it was trammed out by the motorman outside.
How did what you did as a miner differ from the way that your dad worked when he was of a similar age?
When my dad worked there, he mostly was a motorman. But when my granddad worked there, my great-granddad, they drilled with a single jack, with a double jack or a single jack hammer and a drill bit that they would hit, turn. That's how they drilled it. So my grandfather got silicosis from that because there was no water. You drilled everything by hand, and it was all dry drilling. So there's the big difference. Until they come out with those pneumatic drills, there was a lot of silicosis in them old days.
How about ventilation?
We had ventilation pipe that went in, and we had blowers, and then we had what we did from the old workings up above. There was a natural draft that brought cool air in, and then take that air back and put it into the other workings. So we had blowers that blew through vent lines into the clear after we shot a round out, then that would clear the smoke out.
Do you remember the pattern that you drilled and the order of the explosives when you were working the face?
Yes, we put in a drift, we put in a 5-hole burn. And you drill a cross cut like a T, and you would load those first with the primers, and then all the other holes around it, and then the lifters on the bottom were the last to go. So the center would shoot out, and then everything would go to the center, and then the lifters would blow everything back from the face of the drift.
So a stope has a slope and a drift doesn't?
Yeah, a drift is straight in. A stope is where the ore is. And that stope could be on a 30-degree angle, could be on a 60-degree angle. But we had 3 different types of stopes. We had the green vein, which was about 4.5 feet high. We had the red vein, which was 6 feet high. And then we had the yellow vein, which was over 20 feet thick. So the green vein is the worst job I had. That's where I started with when I first went to work, and you'd have to crawl up in there with the miner, and then you'd lay on your side and drill. You'd have to drill a hole first and then put a chain on the stinger. A stinger is what forces the drill up into the hole. You'd chain that stinger, and then you'd lay on your side and drill. So it was, but it was the richest. It was the most valuable stope, was the green vein.
And that had a high lead content?
Had a high lead and silver content. The mine was first discovered in 1865 by some of Connor's army from Stockton. And then it was worked continuous almost up. The mine closed on the 15th of December, 1972.
Why did it close?
Why it closed, there was no place to ship the ore. When the Twilla smelter went down, where they shipped the concentrates from Midville, Utah, there was no place to ship the concentrates. The owner of the mine wanted to ship it up to Anaconda, Montana, but the cost was too great for that, so they shut the mine down. And it was just like a domino effect. All the other mines around the area started closing down too.
And what products did this mine here in Ophir produce?
Silver, lead, zinc, and copper. Very little gold.
And what was it that was the most valuable?
Most valuable during the 1960s was the lead. Because of the Vietnam War, there was a lot of use for lead. So that's where the majority of the ore went.
Is copper an unusual mineral to be associated with lead or silver?
No. In the Ophir Hill, they call it a carbonate ore, so you had silver, lead, zinc, and copper that were all mixed together in with the lead. so it was not uncommon.
Was Ophir a dry mine?
No, it was wet. We had big Ingersoll pumps that pumped water out of the mine up to the main level, and then it gravity flowed out and came out the portal of the mine.
And into the creek bottom?
And down into the creek.
Mm-hmm. Describe one of the mucking machines for me.
A mucking machine was pneumatic. You stood on the side of it. It had a bucket, and you had a car behind it. You'd go in and scoop up the waste or the ore, and then heave it back over the top, and then it would go into the car. And then once the car was filled, you'd take the car out with another little Comanche motor, the battery operated motor, then you'd hook up another empty car, and then you'd do the same thing. It was dangerous. It would swivel, it had a swivel on it that you go either way, and then it had a bucket that went completely over and filled the car up.
So the ore came out of the cart, went onto the grizzly, fell through the grizzly and into the chute, to the skip
To
below.
the skip, yes.
So what distance are we talking about here? Between where the ore went into the grizzly and the skip at the chute?
Probably 10 feet at the most.
Okay. Outside the mine, when the skips came out loaded with the ore, what happened out there?
But the skips never come outside. They were just in the hoist. What came out was the motor with, I usually pulled about 8 to 10 cars of 3.5-ton cars out at a time. And then we'd bring it out, and we'd bring it out to a chute that went down, and we just dumped the cars. And then they had a front end loader that would load the trucks to take it over to Midvale. So you just dump it. Then the waste went around into Wildcat Canyon, they called it, and you dump all the waste rock over there. Like if you was running a drift to get to an ore body, you'd take the waste over the other way, and then you take the ore to this place where you dumped it down a chute.
And the motor hauled that waste out?
The motor took the ore out, but going around into Wildcat Canyon, they had another little Comanche motor that would hook up 2 cars and take it around. And it was especially bad in the winter. You had to put a little snow plow on it because it would get a lot of snow. So you'd have to take the little Comanche motor and get the track cleared with the snow plow, and then come back and get the 2 cars. So you'd only take 2 cars at a time around into Wildcat Canyon.
How did the miners know which direction to take adrift to get to an ore body?
What they had was engineers that came out, and they would say, okay, this is where you have to do. They used a instrument called a Brunton, and it would tell them, okay, you're on the right. They would look at the ore, at the beddings, and they'd say, okay, this is the way you need to go to get to that vein. And that's what we relied on, was the engineers to tell us, okay, we got to run this way, or we got to run a little more to the south, or a little more to the east, west. So we relied on the engineering.
At the time they closed the Ophir Hill Mine, how extensive was the underground working?
It's one of the largest mines in Ophir. It's, I'd say there's at least 18 miles of underground workings in there alone, just in drifts. And then those stopes are humongous because of the old workings. William Andrew Clark, the first one that started the build a mill, there was a mill that sat next to the mine, on the old mine, was called the Wild Delirium and Miner's Delight. And why they called it the Wild Delirium, they'd get in there and they'd get lost because it was just so many old workings. But Zenick Wall was the first one that built the mill, and he later became a millionaire. He's got a mansion up on North Temple in Salt Lake. Then he sold it to E.W. Clark, who was a senator from Montana, and he improved the mill, and then he, like I say, he built this house over here, the company house, in 1905, and he shipped a lot of the concentrates by wagon over to Stockton, which they call Terminus. That's where the narrow gauge railroad terminated. And then later on, he's the one that actually built the railroad from Salt Lake to San Pedro, California, down through Rush Valley. So he was a millionaire, but he was from Montana. And so then later on in 1912, he built a railroad spur from down at St. John up to Ophir, called the Ophir St. John Railroad. And then he shipped the concentrates by rail to the smelters in Salt Lake.
How many mines were in this area?
In the 1870s, there was 2,700 locations. That doesn't mean it was a mine. It could have been a prospect hole, but the biggest mine was the Ophir Hill. There was the Buffalo. There was the Hidden Treasure. There was the Buckhorn Mine, the Cliff Mine, the Tiger Mine, the Lion Mine on Lion Hill, Porter Rockwell's Mine, and Chloride Point. There was a lot of mines.
Did you ever go into any of them?
I used to go into them all the time. That was a favorite thing of mine. Me and a friend of mine would go into these mines, and it was unbelievable what you'd find. You'd find like a shirt hanging on a nail, and it was just like the elements wouldn't destroy anything. It was just like walking back in past time. You'd find old lunch buckets, candle holders, carbide lamps, bottles. That's what I liked about going in the mines. You just find it was just like walking in the past, but there was no elements to destroy anything. It was just left like it was.
How big a role do you think the mines in the Ophir area played in the state of Utah?
They played a big part. You go back into the 1870 newspapers, the Salt Lake Herald, the Salt Lake Tribune, Ophir was actually headlines on mining, like Alda. Alda and Ophir were headline stuff in the newspapers back in the 1870s. Like I say, Ophir was, the population peaked about 3,500 people in Ophir Canyon in the 1870s. 4 hotels, saloons, breweries, attorneys, all kinds of general merchandising stores. It was a big mining town. 4 hotels. Had a daily stage that ran out of Salt Lake to Ophir. Wines and Kimball ran a stage to Ophir daily. Left early in the morning from Salt Lake and landed its passengers here in the evening at Ophir. So Ophir was a large mining community.
When did the Ophir community begin to decline?
A lot of the surface workings on Lion Hill, these high-grade silver mines, started declining in the 1880s, and that's when Ophir went on the decline until the 1890s, and that's when I say Enos Wall and then E.W. Clark built the mill in Ophir, and then things started to revive again when they started to get the mill going and bring the ore out of the Ophir Hill. But there was other small mines operating then too.
What strikes you as an outstanding event or theme in the history of Ophir?
Well, probably when the railroad came in 1912 on August 1st. That's where we come up with this Ophir Day. We have an Ophir Day on August 1st every year where we get all the old timers to celebrate. We go up to the park and they call it Ophir Days, but that's why they celebrate. That's when the railroad come in on August 1st, 1912. And it was not a narrow gauge railroad. It was a broad gauge railroad that E.W. Clark actually built.
Most mining towns that I've been aware of have some stories about robberies or hangings and differences of opinion and things like that. Is Ophir any different?
In the 1870s, there was a lot of shootings, in saloons. No hangings that I know of, but there was gun battles, and there was conflicts over different claims. People would get in conflict over their claim, a mining claim, and there'd be conflicts. So 1870s was the big time for Ophir.
So a century later, when the mine closed down, there'd been a lot of changes.
A lot of changes.
Thinking back to your time working in the Ophir Hill Mine, what was your favorite experience, your favorite story you'd like to share?
My favorite experience was the people, the miners I worked with. There was only about 30 of us, and we all got together, and we'd have parties, and that's what I liked the most about it, was the people that I worked with, the miners. I met a lot of different interesting miners, a lot of tramp miners that come from Butte, Montana, and different places to work here, and then they'd head out again, and it was interesting. You met a lot of interesting people.
Anything else about your time as a miner that you'd like to share with us?
Being as a miner, my grandmother had some old pictures of my great-grandfather at some of the mines he worked at. And then I kind of got involved with the history of mining. And then I really got involved when I started doing more research on Ophir Hill and different mines around the area, like Line Hill. Porter Rockwell had a mine up here on Line Hill on the south side. So there was interesting characters here in Ophir, so I got more involved with just the different miners and the mining community in Ophir City and everything that was revolved around the mining. So you don't see many hard rock mines anymore. It's kind of it's a kind of a thing that's gone from the past. You don't see hard rock mines like you did back when in the 60s. A lot of things now are being open pitted, or it's kind of a dying thing of the past now, hard rock mining.
If you could, would you go back?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I'd go back. Yeah.